Mark 11, 12 to 25, I titled this, I don't give a fig. Or maybe that's the tree saying, I don't give a fig.
And you won't ever again.
You won't ever again. Now we hit the triumphal entry Palm Sunday right on the nose, time-wise.
Mm-hmm.
But now this is a slow approach to the crucifixion and the resurrection. So during the Passover, and the Passover was not just one day. Of course, it was a whole week's worth of celebration. There were no places to stay near Jerusalem because of the thousands of Jews that had traveled from places far away in order to celebrate this important piece of their history. They were given the command by God through Moses to celebrate this time. And it was an important feast because it celebrated the fact that God was faithful to deliver his people from the bondage that they were under as being slaves in Egypt. And even though the people, this is the interesting thing. We might say that God really delivers people when they're obedient and faithful. Well, he's delivering these people who are not being obedient and being faithful. In fact, they have the gift of what's the wah-wah gift? Wah, 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 everything's wrong. Or as, our friend used to say, do you want me to call the wambulance?
Or the other half, would you like a little cheese with that
Yes,
wine?
with that wine, that's right. This is why Jesus and his followers traveled each evening to Bethany to stay with Mary, Martha, and Lazarus at their home. Because there really was no place for them to stay. Talk about no room at the inn. There was no room because you had every Jew, every male Jew, by the way, was instructed to come, if they were within any kind of a distance that they could travel, to come to Jerusalem and to celebrate the Passover. And so Jerusalem was filled. It was jam-packed. It was like, I can't even think of anything that would draw that many people, even today. But they were there for the celebration, and they were there out of obedience, because that's what God had commanded them to do. So just kind of envision this for a second. You have down at the bottom of the hill, on the opposite side from where the temple is, you have the Jordan River, and then a little ways in from there you have Jericho, or at least they built a new city there. So, but Jericho for all practical purposes. And then as you went up the Mount of Olives, because that was the name of that mountain, as you went up there, you would get to Bethany, which means the house of figs. Okay? And then as you go up further, you got to Bethphage, Phage, which means the house of unripened figs. That is a little strange. And then as you keep on going up, eventually you get up to the crest of the hill, and you can see the temple, you can see everything from up there. And then you would go down the other side, and there would be the Garden of Gethsemane. I can't say it.
Garden?
It's a garden.
That
Yes.
garden.
Yes, and it has olive trees in it.
Cool.
Yeah. So anyway, so every day they, at the end of the day, they would spend the day in Jerusalem, and they would climb up to the crest of the hill, and then go back down until they got to Bethany. So walking is In fact, for most of the world, other than the bicycles, people walk everywhere. Probably very, very healthy, but it's the way people did things. So here's Jesus and his followers, his disciples, and they're walking up. I can see him going into Mary and Martha's, Lazarus' home and saying, "Oh, do you have room for the 13 of us? We're your house guests." Well, they might have camped out outside too, because that would have been fine. People's homes weren't that big in those days. So I just wanted you to get that picture of he's going back and forth, back and forth. So the first time was what we call Palm Sunday, or the triumphal entry. They came from Bethany, which is where they were staying, because they originally came from that direction, and went up into the temple, made his triumphal entry, looked around in the temple, saw what was going on, which was not good, and he saw how it was so secular, and how the people were it was a marketplace. It would be like, it was like it was not quite a flea market, but it was definitely a marketplace. But he didn't do anything then. So then it's getting toward the end of the day. They go back up the mountain, down to Bethany to stay the night. The next morning they get up, they make the same trip again. So this is where we were at. The morning after his triumphal entry into Jerusalem, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Well, I guess he would be hungry. And that's verse 12. He saw a fig tree in the distance that was full of leaves. And he went to see if there was any fruit there. There was, by the way, a season for harvesting figs, just like there's we would say there's a time when we harvest pecans off of the trees out. You don't harvest them when they're all green and when the husk hasn't started to open up. You wait. There's a time for it to happen. And so there was a season for harvesting figs, but this wasn't the time. Now we know that every subject that's brought up in the Bible and every situation that occurred with Jesus and his followers was a teaching opportunity for him. The fig tree was symbolic of Israel. And so here was the fig tree with no fruit. And remember what we talked about earlier about having fruit being a symbol of who you are. And when there's when it's showing no fruit, then this is not a good thing. And there's plenty of parables about that, about the tree that was not bearing fruit, and so the landowner says,
tear it down.
yeah, the landowner says, no, cut that tree down. It's not bearing any fruit. It's just taking up space. And so he says, give me one more season. So he fertilizes it, he tills the soil around it, he does whatever. And I don't even remember the last part of it, whether there was fruit eventually or not. But the point was, when the people of Israel were not being obedient, when they were not humbling themselves before God, when their relationship with God became more or less a religious exercise,
Their heart wasn't into it. They were just doing it because this is what we do every year. We go, there's this big party, and we go to the party. And so Jesus is going to use this as an opportunity. So let's turn to 11, 12 now. Put in my
cheaters here so I can see what I'm doing. Okay. Okay. So verse, we'll just start from verse 12. The next day, as they were leaving Bethany, Jesus was hungry. Seeing in the distance a fig tree in leaf, he went to find out if it had any fruit. When he reached it, he found nothing but leaves, because it was not the season for figs.
Is this Matthew or Mark?
This is Mark. Mark 11.
Mark 2:11?
No, Mark 11, chapter 11.
11, 12.
Oh, okay. All right. I thought that was Mark 2 for some odd reason. I was thinking.
Oh, welcome to my world. Then Jesus said to the tree, he didn't see any fruit on the tree. Then Jesus spoke to the tree, said to the tree, "May no one ever eat fruit from you again." And his disciples heard him say that. On reaching Jerusalem, Jesus entered the temple area, and he said, "Well, here we are, and look at all the wonderful things there are to buy here. And I can't wait to change my money from my local money into the temple coins so I can buy some of this wonderful stuff." No, he didn't do that. He entered the temple and he began driving out those who were buying and selling there. So he was driving out not only the merchants, but also the customers. He overturned the tables of the money changers, which sent the coins flying everywhere, and the benches of those selling doves. The doves were a sacrifice that most, or a sparrow would be probably the cheapest. That if you wanted to offer a sacrifice, aren't 2 sparrows sold for a penny, I think is how that goes. So they're selling these doves, and they would not allow anyone to carry merchandise through the temple courts. Okay, now, sometimes we read past that. And he didn't allow merchandise to be carried through the temple courts. I gotta say, up till now, I never really paid any attention to that. And yet this time I did. Evidently, in order to get to the other side of the temple, you could either go around the temple and get where you're going, or you would walk through the temple with your merchandise, with your stuff you're going to sell, not because you're going to sell it there, but because you're using going through the temple as a shortcut to get where you were going.
Oh, boy.
And so Jesus sees this, and he knows what's going on, and he says, "Whoa, wait a minute. You guys can't do this. Why are you doing this?"
This is not a thoroughfare.
Yes, this is not the on-ramp here to get where you're going. So there was a lot more going on there than what meets the eye. Okay. So,
17.
yeah. And as he taught them, so he's in the court, because in the center you had the Holy of Holies, where the Ark of the Covenant was, and the only person who could go in there was the high priest, and he could only go in there once a year anyway. And then there was, outside of that, was the holy place. So the holy place, and then the Holy of Holies. And then outside of that, there was the court of the women, there was the court of the men, And then outside of that was the court of the Gentiles. So it's a huge area that went all the way around. And so the Gentiles that wanted to go could only go that far. And there were signs up there that said, if you're a Gentile and you go past this point, you will be killed on the spot. So that makes sense. I mean, they took this thing very, very seriously. So he was in there teaching, whether he was in the court of the Gentiles or where he was. Knowing him, he was probably in that spot. So as he was teaching, he said, "Is it not written, my house will be called a house of prayer for all nations," meaning not just the Jews, but the Gentiles as well. "But you have made it a den of robbers." A den of robbers. Why were they being referred to as robbers? When you go into a place and you need to exchange, and it's any foreign country, and you want to exchange your money, your dollars for pesos or whatever it is you want to do, so that you can spend it out in the community, if you've traveled at all, that if you try to hand them American money, they're going to say thank you very much, and you're not going to get any change, because they know you don't understand the money, and they're going to try to rob you of instead of doing things fairly. In these days, in order to spend your money in Jerusalem, you had to exchange your money. Say you lived in Macedonia or Persia or wherever you lived, and you'd made that trip and you had that local money with you. You can't spend that in Jerusalem. So they had money changers, and the money changers certainly had a way of having the exchange rate be in their favor, way in their favor. So people would go in, they'd have to exchange their money. So they were not doing it fairly according to whatever the exchange rate at the time. They were inflating it so that they could rob the people that were coming there to celebrate the Passover. And the same was true with the animals. We know that when people wanted to bring their animal in to sacrifice it at the temple, that there were certain guidelines that you had to, the animal, the lamb for instance, it couldn't have any defects. It couldn't have one ear that was down, or one blind eye, or one broken leg, or whatever it is. And then that was understandable. So you would have to exchange or buy an animal that would pass inspection from these people that were selling. And a lot of the people that were selling these things were working for the priests. They were the ones that set this up. And so they were, or sometimes the animal would be brought to them to be inspected, and they'd say, "Oh no, this animal's not going to make it past the inspection. You need to get another animal." And so there was nothing wrong with the animal. There wasn't the obvious defects, but they wanted to sell those. Imagine millions of people coming there, and it's like when the Olympics are being held in a city, and the city has been preparing for years. When they know that they got the bid for the Olympics, they know they're going to rake it in. It's millions and millions of dollars.
So does other countries when the military comes in to do exercise.
Yep.
Thailand's like that. They have people come from all over, set up bazaars, and turn their houses into kitchens and stuff.
Sure.
And sell clothes.
Make it while they got the opportunity.
Capitalize.
Yep. So this is kind of what was going on. Not at all what God had wanted this to become. And so Jesus is seeing all of this, and he's saying, so verse 18, the chief priests and the teachers of the law heard what Jesus was saying, and they began looking for a way to reward him for what great work he was doing. No, they were looking for a way to kill him. Gosh. For they feared him. Why would they fear him? He's an itinerant preacher. He's not anybody important. Why did they fear him so much? Because the whole crowd was amazed at his teachings. And when evening came, they went out of the city. So that's the first part of this. There was a time when Jesus was, his area that he was ministering in was the Galilee area for the most part. He traveled in other places, but that's where the Sea of Galilee and all the little towns around that, Capernaum and where Peter lived, and a lot of the other areas. And that was fine. The priests would come down, and they would see. They came down when John the Baptist. Remember when John the Baptist was baptizing people, and he came down, or the priest came down and said, "By what authority are you doing this?" By what authority am I doing this? And so John says, "Who warned you ahead of time? Who warned you of the wrath to come?
You snakes.
You brood of vipers." He had missed out on that politically correct seminar that they were holding, and he just spoke it like it was. Now, next week we're going to talk about authority, but in this case, they wanted to kill him because they felt that if they in the past, by the way, this has worked. If you didn't like what somebody was teaching and preaching, they would disappear into the night. This wasn't necessarily a thing where you had to have a trial and you had, like they did with Jesus. He might just disappear. You might find his body buried out in the desert somewhere later. But if you, what do they say? If you cut off the head of the snake, then the snake's gone. So this was their theory, was we need to get rid of this Jesus because he's threatening our position of authority with the Roman government.
The author is threatening their position of authority.
Yeah. Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Now we get to the second part here, which is titled here, "The Withered Fig Tree." Verse 20. In the morning, as they went along, and once again, in the morning, they're leaving Mary and Martha and Lazarus' place. They're going up the hillside again, following the path. They saw the fig tree. Same fig tree that Jesus had said, "May no one ever eat any fruit from you again." They saw it withered from the roots. In other words, it wasn't just a branch that was dead, it was dead down into the roots. In other words,
He did.
it's gone. There's no chance of it coming. It's not like the freeze we had, and I don't know if you've noticed, but in the fig tree, interesting that it's a fig tree. The fig tree is starting to leaf out in some of the branches. There's a fig tree on each side of the entrance to the driveway. And I noticed when I drove in today that the one still on the right, as you're driving in, still didn't have any leaves, but the one on the left has got leaves coming out of the branch. Some of the other trees that were like completely looked like it was decimated, there's leaves coming out the bottom. Just like you'll see with the Esperanza plants along here that we cut back every season. Little green leaves coming out at the bottom. Well, this is dead down to the root. So, Peter remembered about the fig tree. This is just the day before. And he said to Jesus, Rabbi, look, the fig tree you cursed has withered. Now, once again, Jesus' remarks seem to not be on target for what was just being said. So Jesus says, have faith in God, Jesus answered. I tell you the truth, if anyone says to this mountain, go throw yourself into the sea, and does not doubt in his heart, but believes that what he says will happen, it will be done for him. Okay. They're climbing a mountain. If someone says to this mountain, mountains are also symbols. We have sometimes in our lives mountains that are challenges for us. It's like we would say, climbing the mountain of our things that are going on in our life. Let me see how I worded this. I worded it better than I just said it. Yeah, the word mountain can mean a challenge or a mountain to climb. So in other words, if you're, and of course a mountain would be a big challenge for you. So if you have, or we would also say if you're going through a storm in life, it doesn't mean it's raining outside, it means you're going through something difficult. In this case, there's a mountain that it seems like you're climbing a mountain, it's so hard. You don't have to do that. You don't have to go through that by yourself, alone, because God is saying, and what He said here, He said, if you by faith say to this mountain, throw yourself into the sea. In other words, if by faith you say, okay, this mountain that's in my life, whatever it is, I can overcome this by God's power. And so he goes on to make it even clearer here, because he doesn't stop right there. Therefore I tell you, verse 24, whatever you ask for in prayer, believe that you have received it, and it will be yours. And when you stand praying, okay, so first he's talking about, God does answer prayers. He doesn't go totally all into that prayer thing, but we know that we pray for people. Well, we pray for people's salvation all the time, and sometimes it takes a long time. But then it can happen. So it's on His timing, not ours. So then he goes on and says, and when you stand praying, if you hold anything against anyone, you're feuding with somebody, forgive him, so that your Father in heaven may forgive you your sins. In other words, if you have unforgiven or unrepentant sin in your life, and you're going to God in prayer to ask Him to do something, Jesus is saying, take care of this first. Go to your brother, go to your neighbor, go to your sister, whoever it is, and make things right with them. Get that settled. And then go back and pray to God. And then God will forgive you your sin. And your sin is the thing that keeps you. Sin separates us from God. So it's very difficult to, sometimes when prayers aren't being answered, sometimes it's a good thing for us to say to ourselves and to God in prayer, to say, Is there something I'm doing? Is there somebody I'm not forgiving? Is there something going on in my life that I'm really not aware of? I'm blind to it. Help me to see what that is. Because I don't want my prayers to go unanswered because of the fact that I'm being unrepentant. So Jesus himself is saying this. Clear your conscience of your sin before you ask God to answer your prayer. The same it could be said for when we have communion. Paul certainly teaches the same thing. When you're going to go before the communion table and you have something you're holding against somebody, then don't receive the communion as if you're all right with everything. In fact, the idea is you know there's going to be communion. You take care of it. You ask yourself. You do a conscience search, and you say, okay, what am I not seeing? God, help me to see it, whatever it is, so that I can go and partake of the Lord's Supper, in this case, the communion. But to just flippantly oh well. Somewhere we have to have some reverence for what we're doing. And quite honestly, we don't always do that. And we need to take it seriously. And here at least we know that the first Sunday of the month when we have potluck, we have communion. So you know it's coming. So settle things up with the Lord before that happens.
If you have problems giving reverence to the Lord, just watch an earthquake video or a volcano explode and realize He created all that.
Tornado.
Yeah. So he's. So anyway, so Jesus is instructing his disciples as he walks along, and they may be had been just as confused because he doesn't go into any detail about it right then. He doesn't say, well, the mountain, is this, and this means this, and the fig tree means Israel, and Israel's not showing any fruit, so therefore I'm going to curse the tree. The tree's not going to bear fruit anymore to anybody until they get their act together. It is let me see what I got going here. See if there's something that I've been missing here. No, I guess I did all right. I have to be cautious because my day is not going that well. So I better check it out here and make sure that I'm. Yes. So next week we have a section on the authority of Jesus being questioned. Before we finish up with chapter 11.